Hello everyone. So this video is to show you how to complete the square. So you can solve quadratics by this method, completing the square. There's also other methods for solving, which on page 2 here, we're going to go through when you should use each method to solve. Completing the square is not the easiest method for solving, but they still teach it to you, so you still have to know how to do it. So let's take this first problem here. To solve this by completing the square, my first step, I would like to have the x's alone. So I'm just going to subtract this 7 over to the other side. So I get x squared plus 6x equals -7. Okay, now here's the actual completing the square step. I'm going to change this to x squared plus 6x plus blank equals -7 plus blank. So you're going to add the same number to each side. Now, the blank, let's just write blank right here. What you're going to do is take the x number, you're going to divide that by 2, and then square it. Okay, so this is what I mean. We're going to take the 6 because it's in front of the x. That's the x number I'm talking about. So we're going to take 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and then take 3 squared, which is 9. That's going to get added in right there and right there. So I have that. Now, that gives me x squared plus 6x plus 9. And then I can just add -7 plus 9, so that equals 2. And then the whole point of completing the square is so that this part can be factored. And this factors into x plus 3 times x plus 3, because it's whatever multiplies to 9, and adds up to 6. Now the thing is, these always end up being exactly the same when you're doing this method. So I'm going to rewrite this part as x plus 3 quantity squared equals 2. I'm going to take this up here so we have a little more room. So x plus 3 squared equals 2. Alright, so now I'm going to keep solving for x at this point. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So x plus 3 equals plus or minus rad 2. And then I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. You can't actually subtract 3 from a radical, but you could rewrite it as, I would write it as -3 plus or minus rad 2. And then just leave that as your final answer. Now this one over here, number 2, has the same beginning step where I need to add 5 to both sides. So I get 3x squared plus 24x equals 5. Now, this 3 that's in front makes it a little bit harder. It gives me an extra step where I need to take 3 out of the x's. And I divide that out of both of them. I'm factoring it out, so I get x squared plus 8x. Now, from here, I'm going to just go ahead and set this up because I'm going to have plus the new number, plus blank, equals 5 plus blank. I find that new number in the same way as before. So I take my x number, which is 8, and I do 8 divided by 2, which is 4. And then I square the 4, which is 16. So I stick the 16 right here. Now the trickiest thing is that normally we would just write 16 right there, right? But we're not going to do that. We have to do 16 times 3. Because if you think about the left-hand side, this 3 that we took out onto the outside is going to multiply with the 16 because of distributing. So on that side of the equation, we've actually added a total of 48. So on this side of the equation, we also have to add 48. And that's the trickiest part, but we're done with that. So now we have 3, and then the x squared plus 8x plus 16, that will factor. That's going to become x plus 4 times x plus 4. And then this add up 5 plus 48, that's 53. So not very nice numbers, but that's okay. And then this can be rewritten as 3 times x plus 4 squared equals 53. So I've completed the square. Now to continue solving, I divide both sides by 3. And that's just a fraction. So then I have x plus 4 squared equals that fraction, 53 thirds. Just leave it like that. And then we can take the square root of both sides. So that means that, let's maybe bring this up here. That means that x plus 4 will equal plus or minus the square root of 53 thirds. And then we're going to subtract 4 from each side. So just rewrite this. X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 53 thirds. And let's just leave it like that. That's kind of a messy radical. Usually the problems won't come out that messy. I just made up these numbers for the beginning problem, so I'm sure that's why it's like that. But just leave it like that, and that would be your answer for number 2. And so now, let's just kind of recap. You have different choices when you are asked to solve a quadratic. What we just did was completing the square. Now I wrote down here a very important note right here. I said I would avoid completing the square unless they specifically tell you to solve it that way. That's just because completing the square has so many steps that there's a lot of places where you could make a silly mistake and then your answers would be wrong. So this is the order I would actually decide how to solve my quadratics in. The first one is to just solve it. If x is only written once in the equation, you can just solve like normal. Like right here, here's our x. So I can just do simple divide by 4, divide by 4. So that gives me x minus 3 squared equals 9. Then I can take the square root of both sides. So x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 9, which is 3. Then I'd add 3. And I'll get 2 different answers because I'm going to have positive 3 plus 3, which is 6. And I'm also going to have negative 3 plus 3, which is 0. But that's method 1, is just solve. Now, if 1 doesn't apply, meaning that you have you like look through your equation and you have an x in more than one spot, like that, we can't just solve it, but what we should try is factoring. And this one I set up does factor into x plus 3, x plus 10, x plus 3, x plus 7 equals 0. So our 2 answers are x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 7. And that's the easiest way to solve that kind. But then, of course, there will be ones that you can't do number 1, you can't just solve. You try to factor, but it doesn't factor, because that doesn't always work. And so then you can use the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula will always work. So if you want to, you can always use it, but it's usually not the quickest way. That's why we don't use it every single time. But that's where you go negative b, so negative 7, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 7 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 2, all over 2a, so all over 2 times 1. Now if I just do the work for you guys on this, it's going to be negative 7 plus or minus that square root. When I subtract, it's 49 minus 8. So it's 41, and then all over 2. And you could actually just circle that because the square root of 41 doesn't reduce at all, doesn't simplify. So that's the hierarchy that I would use when deciding how to solve your quadratics.